Hello, and we are live. Welcome everyone to the Researchers Report. I hope everybody's doing all right out there tonight. We've got a great show tonight. Got a great co-host tonight. Stepping in for Kerry is Brent Thomas from the Paranormal Portal. How are you doing, Brent?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun to be back in the big chair here. I can't quite fill Carrie's spot, but I'll do my best.
You do your best. I know you will. Our guest, coming from South Dakota, has been a paranormal investigator, cryptozoologist for 25 years, the founder of the Paranormal Intelligence Agency, current director of Crypto Four Corners. Our guest is a regular on Ancient Civilizations, Deep Space, and Open Mind. It's a documentary series produced by Gaia, which I love. Is so much more as well. We're going to get into that tonight throughout the show. But our guest is Jack Cary. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Daniela. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Before we start tonight, I want to just announce, I know everybody knows Cal Gautreaux, LA, Louisiana Swamp Ape. He's had some surgery today. I'm sure he'd welcome some prayers and thoughts from the people in the chat, because I know a lot of you guys know him, but he was involved in a car accident some weeks ago, and he's just had an operation today, and he's feeling a bit better. He sent me these pictures before. He had herniated discs in his neck, and he's been suffering a lot with numbness and all sorts of things, but he's just got through his surgery today. So I wanted to give him a shout out, because I know a lot of people like Carl, and so it just shows you that, you know, in seconds things can change in your life, how fragile life is, and within seconds things can change. So it's just a wake-up call, really, isn't it, to value what you've got and make the most of what you got, because you just don't know what could happen. But he's on the up. He's out of surgery, and I think that's great. So let's crack on with the show tonight. Jack Cary, how do you get into Bigfoot and the paranormal?
Well, that's I can answer both in the same breath, I suppose. I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma. This is a place which even today has more Bigfoot sightings than almost anywhere else in the country. And this was in Lafleur County, which today has more Bigfoot sightings than the 4 surrounding states. So it's a hotbed of activity. And growing up, Bigfoot was something that we talked about all of the time, because that was the area, going into southern Arkansas and into Missouri and areas like that, where they had Muddy Boggy Creek and the release of that movie. Some of the earliest sightings in North America are on that Arkansas-Oklahoma border, where the Ouachita Mountains are, going into the Ozarks. And that's where I grew up. And I grew up in an old antebellum mansion. And this place was as haunted as could be. I saw ghosts and completely black figures, etc. So it kind of led me in both directions. But my earliest television memory, 6 years old, I begged my parents to let me out of the yard chores so that I could watch a Bigfoot documentary they had been airing. Right. And they let me do it, and I've never looked back. And,
wow.
Yeah. So
that's where it starts. I mean, a lot of people don't get that experience, do they? Or they just know nothing about it. And then when they have these encounters, they haven't even got a clue how to make sense of what these things are. So what sort of, have you ever had a sighting of Bigfoot?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay. Were you a hunter, or were you looking for Bigfoot?
J.C. Johnson and I were actually doing ongoing investigations in northern New Mexico, in the Chusca Mountains, which is on Navajo Indian reservation land. And we were actually working with Dr. Christopher Dyer, who was the executive director of the University of New Mexico at the time and a field biologist. And during this period of, well, it was a little over 10 years of doing these investigations, we were able to obtain DNA from 2 separate deposit sites with eyewitnesses to the DNA being left, and discovered a lot of amazing information and evidence that is still little known today, even in the Bigfoot community.
Let's go back a little bit. How did you get involved with JC Johnson? What were you doing at the time?
Sure, I was already known for doing paranormal investigations, and he had a crypto case that seemed to stretch the line between paranormal and full-on cryptozoological, and he called me in to help him on this case. Today it's known as the ultra terrestrial case. It's on YouTube, and at the time it was all over the place. And you know, we immediately bonded. We became brothers, and we were inseparable from that point forward. He even lived with me in Colorado for a few years while we were working together. So best man I ever knew. And I'm saying, you know, because I'm a little prejudiced, but he's probably the best cryptozoologist that ever lived. So it was my honor. I learned a ton, and I continue his work today.
Wow. So tell us about the Genome Project then. How did that come about, or how was it presented to you?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know kind of the backstory to the Genome Project. Now, I cover this in my new book, Bigfoot Unbound. It's going to be out in a couple of weeks. And I document 4 separate cases of successful obtaining of Bigfoot DNA. And in each case, they had an eyewitness to the DNA being left. And in each case, the results were exact. And in each case, they point in a direction that most investigators haven't even contemplated. And so it's going to be something the Bigfoot community's not really seen before. It's a new analysis of the mystery, and you can think of it as the readers being a jury, and I'm the prosecutor, and I'm presenting this evidence as Exhibit A, B, and C to back up a theory as to a solution for the mystery. So,
yeah, well, that'll be interesting to look into that. So what did it involve then, from your perspective? What was some of the things you were doing yourself?
Well, we found so much evidence. These DNA collection sites were amazing. So the first DNA collection site, and we got these calls from, most people don't know, but the Navajo tribe has something called the Navajo Rangers. They respond to all kinds of activity, and there's all kinds of Bigfoot sightings on the Navajo reservations in northern New Mexico. And J.C. Johnson was connected to the Navajo tribe because he married a Navajo woman. And he ended up becoming the guy who got all the Bigfoot calls. So every time he received one of those, we were out in the field, and we picked up a ton of physical evidence over the years. One of the most amazing finds was what we call a disappearing track line. And we were deep in the Chusca Mountains in an area that is so rough that it takes like a major 4x4 or horseback to get up into. And it was a 50-yard long track line of 19-inch footprints that were 8 to 9 inches wide. And right at this field continued, the topography was exactly the same. And yet the tracks just stopped right at the 50 yards. They should have just kept going, and they just dead stopped. Like the thing just walked into another dimension, basically. And that's not what I believe happened, actually. I discuss what I believed happened in my book. And the very interesting thing about this subject was that its stride, we were measuring, was about 6 feet as it was strolling through this field. And then about halfway through, it changes right to 10 feet. And right away, we looked at each other and our Navajo guides, and we were like, something spooked this thing. And it took off running. And that led me into all kinds of directions, because immediately I thought to myself, what's going to spook a bipedal apex predator that weighs 800 to 1,000 pounds, leaving 19-inch footprints, and is the master of the forest? What's going to spook an animal like that?
Right.
And that led me into the theory that I have in my book. And JC and I kind of looked at each other like, what the hell? And immediately it came into my mind that whatever this threat was, because there were no other markings anywhere in the field, the threat had to have come from the sky. And suddenly things started to make sense to me. And ever since that point, I pivoted into a direction of simply following the evidence. And that's what I've been doing. As a professional paranormal investigator, which I have been for 25 years now, I have to go where the evidence leads me and not where I would like it to lead me. And that's a very fine line to walk. And it did not lead me in the direction I wanted it to lead me. And kind of obliterated my earlier theories about the origins of this species, and just took me off in a whole other direction.
Wow. You had mentioned that you guys were I'm sorry to kind of spiderweb here, but you had mentioned that you said a DNA deposit site. What does that mean? And how were you collecting DNA, and how was this witnessed?
Absolutely. So, and all of this was filmed and presented on the Crypto Four Corners YouTube channel at the time. Okay. JC was alive. So Crypto Four Corners was a huge organization. I'm still the current director, but he founded it, and that'll always kind of be his organization. But deposit site number one, we had a Navajo who had reported to the police that a Yaetzo, which is what they call Bigfoot, was on his property, crouched down next to an old, wooden shed that he had out on the property. Now, this thing was like ramshackle. It had all kinds of splinters and, split wood and stuff on it. And when this thing crouched down next to it, it left probably 1,000 hair strands. And I have photos of that. It's a big chunk of DNA. And Dr. Dyer actually collected it. He's a field biologist. We brought him with us to ensure that these samples were not contaminated in any way. And what's interesting is DNA site number 2 at that time was 80 miles away. And in this case, a group of Navajo were actually cutting wood, which is something they do pretty much all summer because that's how they heat their homes in the winter. But they were using chainsaws. Apparently this spooked a Bigfoot, and it ran through the forest, not realizing that on the other side was a Navajo with an axe chopping some wood. Basically runs right into the same clearing, sees this guy with the axe, pivots 90 degrees, and when it did, it was looking over its shoulder, and it smacked a 10-foot tree and broke it right in half. Oh. And it left blood, fur, and skin right on it. 30 feet from that, behind another tree, was a big tuft of fur that was discovered first by Robert Kreider, who had continued the path down there. I don't know if you know Robert Kreider, but he's a famous cryptozoologist that was part of our team at that time. So, and in this case, we had Dyer with us. He collected that DNA, so we made sure that was not contaminated. And this went to the geneticist who had conducted the Sasquatch genome project. Now, J.C. Johnson had been integral in supplying samples to that study. In one case, it was an entire knuckle that had gotten ripped off an animal when it was trying to pull up a drainage culvert that a skunk had run into, and this was all witnessed by people at the time, and he collected it. That went into the study. But there were 110 samples from cryptozoologists from all over the country. That was studied by Dr. Melba Ketchum. The results came out, and it made worldwide headline news for one day. And then you had these credentialed mainstream scientists come out in their lab coats with the word doctor in front of it and say that basically her results couldn't possibly be, have been done correctly. The DNA all had to be contaminated because the mitochondrial always came back Homo sapien. And that's the female lineage.
That's really interesting. And of course, we all know that the embattlement of that even continues to this day. The whole back and forth about the DNA study, but it's kind of great to talk to you because up until now, for me, most of those are just nebulous samples. I've just heard that samples were submitted and gathered, but to hear this from you, I think is really powerful because you were actually there collecting them, which I think it establishes a credibility to that for me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And, I'll tell everybody out there that DNA simply will not do when it comes to final discovery of this creature. And the reason why is because there is a thing called the World Genetic Bank. Every single known species has their DNA stored within this bank. And whenever a sample is taken by any scientist in the world, anywhere, all they do is send the signature to this World Genetic Bank database, and it makes a match to any known species. Now, we're dealing with a creature that is an unknown, undocumented, uncatalogued primate by our modern science. Therefore, it is not in the World Genetic Bank. And when it gets sent in, or when it's compared to the database, it always comes back Homo sapien with one, what they call polymorphism. And that polymorphism is a genetic mutation, basically, and it's the exact genetic mutation that separates humanity, basically, from chimpanzees. Now, great apes have 35 polymorphisms compared to a human, and this creature has one. And that was actually shown in another study besides ours, which was done by the History Channel with Dr. Jeff Meldrum and a geneticist, field biologist from the University of Minnesota. I talk about all of this in the book, and I actually present 4 of these examples of people obtaining real Sasquatch DNA, how all of the results corroborate one another, and how that corroboration leads us into the direction of, finally solving this mystery.
Very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I've just missed a really good comment in the chat. I'll have to go back to it. So how do you feel now about this then? How it's so misunderstood and there's such a,
Yeah, well, I'm glad in one respect that I'm very saddened that the scientific community would not accept the results based on the fact that the animal had never been cataloged. And because the mitochondrial is Homo sapien, it's really easy just to say the whole thing's contaminated because it doesn't match in one direction. And it's got modern human DNA on the other end. And it's showing unknown primate because it will match the nearest possible animal. But it doesn't mean anything to them. And so they keep saying, that's not going to work. And that's the brick wall that we ran into. And so, we came to the realization that no photographic evidence or video evidence or DNA is going to be good enough. Only the retrieval of remains is going to provide final disclosure of this species. They simply will not accept anything else.
So why are we struggling to get any remains? Why can't we find just a little bit of something?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and one that we spent a long time trying to answer. And the truth is these creatures have a human-like intelligence, and they travel in family units or clans, if you will. And with one of them dies, they do something with their dead. Now, whether this is burial or it's consumption, like some ancient societies had as a form of ancestor worship, they would take on, they believe they would take on the strength and everything of the one that just died in the tribe. We don't know exactly, but we know and have eyewitness encounters from hunters who have shot one only to have other creatures come out and drag it away. So we know that there is these clans, family groups, units there. When one of them goes down, they take it with them. What they're doing with those remains is still a mystery to us, anyway. Yeah.
You just think that they could just slip up, though. I mean, they're not perfect, are they?
No, they're not perfect. And, I remind everybody, we've had like 6-7 man teams in the deepest, darkest forest of North America, in which there are 70 million uninhabited acres. People have no idea how vast the American West is. 70 million acres. And there are thousands and thousands of bears. And we've never come across a single bear carcass. And most professional hunters will tell you the exact same thing. They've never seen a bear carcass. And the reason why is because the forest simply consumes it up very quickly. Even the bones are eaten for the calcium content. And that's really the reason why, between those two things and the fact that these things, they have abilities that people don't quite get. The way I explain it is Sasquatch, let's say that, our best predator type animals, they've got 1-2 like super abilities that allow them to be predators. Like a cheetah has the speed and a lion the strength, etc. These creatures exhibit many more abilities than any other life form on the planet. So if you're, a predator on Earth here, Sasquatch is up here in its genetic ability. And there's nothing right here to fill in that gap. Absolutely nothing. We don't have a species that has 2 or 3 of these aspects, you know what I mean? Yeah. And yet it expresses certain abilities or aspects of other species. And that's part of the overall mystery that I talk about.
Yeah, it is. It's confounding because, they, excuse me, hold on. That they may very well indeed do that. And I think anybody who spends time researching the claims and stuff, I mean, I've come across countless claims through the years of people witnessing a burial, or I've even heard a claim from an apparent ranger that happened to catch a family group carrying a body and then doing a burial ritual, and then afterwards taking extraordinarily large rocks and putting them on top of them. And once you consider that, I mean, anybody that's spent time in any kind of serious forest, especially out here, what I say is I was really surprised. I'm from the Midwest originally, and I moved out here about 7 years ago. And one of the things that I think really took me back was how dense these forests are here in the inland Pacific Northwest. I mean, you could hide a Tyrannosaurus Rex 15 feet away from you. I mean, they are just so dark, and these trees are so huge that it doesn't surprise me that, as you're saying, you're sending these teams out into these desolate forests, but unless you could form a chain somehow and literally, categorically go through every foot, there's so much that you just can't get to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been the challenge for investigators all these many years. And people have to also consider the fact that there is no professional funding
Sure.
for investigators to go out. It's done on their own time and their own dime.
Mhm.
And time is what it takes to solve a mystery. And when you don't have funding for the time, then you're left with what you got. And that's usually an army of researchers going out each weekend, combing their local woods, looking for the evidence. And up to date, that just has not been sufficient enough to retrieve remains that we need. And I wanted to reiterate exactly what you just said. So we had a Navajo elder eyewitness who was up on a bluff overlooking this field and witnessed a burial, just like you're talking about, in which they placed a huge stone on top of it. He would not take us to the location because Yaetso is a holy creature, and so there's no way. But that's interesting corroboration that they are, in fact, burying their dead.
So let me ask you this, Jack, as somebody that's been in this field for a long time, and you've undoubtedly given so much of your own blood, sweat, and tears to this. Is it a slap in the face that the modern that our organized scientific communities aren't looking into this? Is that to you just a slap in the face?
It is, and it's something that that we've talked about in the Bigfoot community and in Crypto Four Corners for a very long time, is trying to get this scientific acceptance from the evidence that we were providing. And there's a couple of things that you have to consider when you consider mainstream geneticists taking this on. So Bigfoot is a can of worms that it's a problem nobody wants to solve. And the reason why is because it is a can of worms. And when you actually prove to the public, if you will, the existence of this creature, there's going to be huge repercussions. The government knows that. When the spotted owl in Washington State was discovered, it nearly bankrupted the entire lumber industry. How much more significant is a half-human primate species living in the forest of North America? What a big problem. Then you have every constituent in this country calling their congressman, asking them what they're going to do about these apex predators in the forest of North America so they can take little Johnny and little Susie to the national forest without worrying about them getting hurt. That's going to be impossible, and they know it. These mainstream scientists, they don't want to rock the boat. They're sitting on $200,000 of student loans. They're not going to put or risk their career and put it on the line and say, you know what? Yeah, this is coming up Homo sapien, but it's not contaminated. It's actually this thing is actually a hybrid. And you're not going to get one of those guys like Todd Disotell at New York University who has looked at multiple samples, because when it comes back a Homo sapien, that's all he ever can get a match to in the World Genetic Bank. So they just leave it right there. They're not going to do any more work than that. Now, Dr. Ketchum did. She actually went down and then began to study the strands themselves, the actual structure of the strands. And she discovered a secret that's truly amazing. And I do present that in my book, so I can't give that away. But there is, in the DNA itself, properties which basically make it impossible for our scientists to accept it.
You also got to wonder if it does, like say tomorrow it was substantiated. And this is something that I guess I believe pretty strongly, is that I think it would be there would be the phone calls, like you say, saying, "Hey, I want to take my kids camping, and these things are out there. What are you going to do about it?" But then the other side of it would be, how many people would suddenly take a huge interest in getting out into the forest so they could see one for themselves? And what would that do for our ecosystem? All of a sudden seeing a huge percentage of rise in visitors and going to our national forests and parks, and what kind of an impact would that have environmentally?
Yeah, very good point. That's a very good point. And there are a lot of cases with a lot of evidence showing that there's been government involvement. We're very aware that the government is already aware that these things exist. They just don't want to acknowledge it because it presents such a huge problem. Bigfoot exists in the collective psyche of humanity like no other cryptid animal. It haunts humanity to a level that no other cryptid animal can even come close to. And this is something that the government has known about for a very long time. Theodore Roosevelt wrote about the Bowman incident in his diary. So, I mean, going back that far back, and it was in the late 1800s that J.W. Burns coined the term Sasquatch because he saw exacting mask of this creature in all these different North American tribes, and so it's they've been aware of it. I even think they may have taken samples, taken animals, downed them, and taken them, and perhaps even tried to weaponize this species.
See, that's kind of that's my X-Files theory about this, and I always say you got to cue the X-Files music, but
Yeah.
if a creature doesn't exist, is it then okay to have genetic testing and goofing around with it? That wouldn't be in violation of international treaties,
Right. And when it comes to this mystery, I'm a huge Sir Arthur Conan Doyle fan.
Okay.
And
Sure.
my favorite quote is a quote of his. And that is, when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth.
Mm.
And over the 20 plus years that I've been investigating the Bigfoot mystery, I've been able to eliminate a lot of impossibilities, leaving probabilities that seem really unprobable. But when you see the case for them, I believe that they're the truth.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories of these teams going into areas and in the cloak of darkness and
Yeah.
black helicopters and all kinds of different claims that are out there. And I know that for the most part you got to take a lot of them with a grain of salt. But what if just a few of those are true? What does that mean?
Sure. Sure.
The implications are
There's been a few cases where people had said that some of the logging companies, for instance, sent in teams of hunters to take care of so-called trouble animals that the loggers were having problems with. And that brings to mind the footage that was taken the last couple of years of the logging. Did you see the footage of the logging crew that are out in the field and this thing launches a tree trunk?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So it's basically like that situation. And going back all the way to the 70s and the 60s, where these loggers were like, what do you want us to do? There's this thing out here throwing tree trunks at us. Well, they hire a team of hunters to go in there and clean it out. And they're definitely not going to say anything about it because they understand what the repercussions would be to their industry.
Do you think that these hunters could be successful? I mean, just given the intelligence and the raw natural ability of these things, do you think that it would be just that easy to just say, oh, I'm going to send in this team of hunters and they're going to be able to bag them?
That's an interesting point as well. There are accounts that have come in saying that not only like a team of hunters from a logging company, but there's been hunters saying that, yeah, I downed this animal. Or there was a blood trail left behind. I mean, so they're hitting biological, flesh and bone. of a creature. So it's one of those things. Do they run off and die? I believe that they're rarely ever alone. And just because you're only seeing one doesn't mean that the others aren't out of sight.
Sure. Yeah.
And, as soon as he runs off, they're with him and they're all gone.
Yeah.
Just going to put this up from Mark Letford. What about skunk ape in the southeast where there is no large rocks for burial? Maybe they eat them, Mark. That could be the other.
Yeah, well, most skunk apes are down in the swampy areas. So you want to talk about fast decomposition. You die in a swamp and you're consumed in 24 hours. There's nothing left.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
What do you feel about the communication language, mind speak? What's going on?
They're telepathic, supposed telepathic abilities. I can tell you what I believe to be true is that the creature has the ability to use infrasound. So there are a couple of different species. So we have a biological precedent, like for instance, elephants use infrasound to communicate over vast distances. And they've proven now that tigers emit an infrasound shortly before their roar, which freezes their prey. Well, we have many eyewitness accounts of a deer freezing and a Sasquatch stepping out and picking up the deer. In other words, they're able to freeze their prey, just like this other ability. And they're able to make humans ill, sick, nauseated through infrasound. Infrasound causes those exact problems. So I believe that this creature actually can use infrasound, and whether or not that's part of their ability to mind speak, I don't know. With the theory that I have, it's quite possible that they have the genetic ability to do that.
How if they can use telepathy and people are experiencing mind speak, how surely we both need to have the ability. I don't know. I'm trying to say this, but I don't feel like I'm telepathic. So how are they able to transmit things, do you think,
Right.
to someone who doesn't necessarily know how to receive?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the same thing is told to us in alien abduction encounters. They're able to telepathically speak into your mind, even though you're not telepathic. That's a phenomenon that kind of runs parallel. There's a lot of properties that seem to overlap, if you will.
They also seem to be able, just with the force of their vocals, to cause, and maybe it's just a fainting issue, but there's been many people that are talk about just, I got dizzy and I was unconscious the next thing I know. So it seems that the sound is definitely a weapon for them. And just when you talk to people, even as simply as being outside, hearing the vocalizations, and they'll be a mile away and people still talk about, you could feel that sound even from that distance. So it makes you consider, well, there are sound weapons developed by a lot of militaries and law enforcement around the world. So sound is a weapon, but these things seem to be able to, just by the force of their lungs and vocal cords, I guess, to produce these really powerful sounds that, as you were saying, the impact where the infrasound, maybe that's mixed in there or something, but it really discombobulates people. The Claire encounter on Sasquatch Chronicles, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but she was from England and was in California, the northern part of California, and she came upon she was up on the edge of a hill, and she came upon a family group down in a bay, and she was going to take pictures of it, but then she dropped her lens cap and it made a sound, and the big one looked up, and she said she'd never seen something move like that. Suddenly it was up there, and the big female was with it, and they were bickering back and forth, and then allegedly, if I'm recalling the story right, it just like it hit the ground, went and then the next thing she know, she was dragged apparently back to her car about 100 yards away, full of scratches and stuff. So
She
she
passed
went up.
out, didn't she? She passed out and she woke up around her vehicle, and it like a top. It felt like a jacket had been, pulled over her shoulders a bit.
Wow.
She'd been dragged up by it. It's fast. That is my favourite. It's 515, by the way, if you're listening to
Yeah, I've often told people that it's not the size that scares you when you're out there; it's the speed.
Oh,
I mean, we're carrying weapons. I'll put one of these down. 50 caliber AR-15 is that's put down the 5 largest land animals on Earth. Is if it can be down, they'll put it down. But the speed, is just unbelievable. I mean, I had one eyewitness say those things moved like ninjas. I didn't know anything could move like that, and that's exactly what it's like. I mean, it is blinding fast, and for anything that big to move that fast, it boggles the mind. It really does.
There's something I thought about yesterday. I mentioned yesterday on the Drawing Bigfoot show. Apparently they come around cars, they come around houses, but they never break anything. Like they never knock off the wing mirror or the aerial. And being that big, and you'd think for them it would be easy just to accidentally. They seem to be so aware of absolutely everything around them, especially aware maybe that they're not touching anything. I'm clumsy enough to knock something off my car. I've done that before, but they don't seem to do that.
No, and there's every reason to believe that these things possess extreme intelligence. This isn't some dumb great ape wandering around the forest of North America. This is something that is very human-like, but not quite human. And its intelligence level is, I think, greatly overlooked by a lot of people that are sort of outside the mystery looking inward. A lot of them, I think, just have the impression it couldn't possibly be real because it's just another, they're thinking, silverback gorilla in the forest of North America. They have no conception of what we're talking about with the possibility of it being hybrid or, in my case, a chimera construction. So, but yeah, that's basically where we're at.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do we move forward? Can we move forward? Are we going into like a rabbit hole where it's not?
Well, I've made one good stab in that direction, and it was Ivan T. Sanderson who said you shouldn't evoke one mystery in order to help solve another. But in this particular case, I think he's wrong about that. And the truth is when you take like all of the missing person cases in the national forest that are unsolved in North America, which are covered now in a series of books by a police investigator called Missing 411.
Sure.
So you can look that up. And there's a lot of them. When you take that on a map and mark every one of them, and then overlay it with the 10,000 known credible Bigfoot sightings in North America, it's a spot-on match. Now, when you take another level on the map, another layer of all the known cave systems in North America, it's a spot-on match. That kind of coincidence is just too much. Now you have a map with 3 layers. You have missing people, Sasquatch sightings, and cave systems overlapping one another in the exact same areas. And in the Paranormal Intelligence Agency, we have a saying: once is chance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. And patterns usually are good places to look.
And of course, the First Nations lores and histories talk about them stealing, their
Sure.
tribe members away. Like most often, it seemed most of them, and not completely, but the ones I've heard was it generally took young maidens or women away.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's not unprecedented. It's that's really interesting though. I didn't realize the cave thing as well.
Yeah, and I have a film I've produced about this on my YouTube channel, which is Paranormal Intelligence Agency YouTube channel, and it's called Bigfoot and the Missing, and I show the maps, overlay them. I even present some speech that was recorded, some actual speech between creatures recorded by Ron Moorhead in 1972 in the Sierra Nevadas. And some interesting evidence from one of the Yellowstone cameras controlled by Yellowstone on an auto pan, showing 5 of these creatures all at once. And it's compelling because that area, that national forest, has a lot of unsolved missing person cases in it.
Is that the buffaloes?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great video. Yeah, and how that didn't get picked up even more by more people, I don't know, because when you
I don't know, because you couldn't have faked it. It's a national park camera.
and you think of how huge bison are and buffalo are. When you're close to these animals, they're dwarfing us.
Yeah.
And yet whatever's in the background is big or bigger than them.
Big enough to snap its neck like a chicken. That's what you're talking about.
Cock-a-doodle-doo. Yeah.
I've just put a link to your channel in the chat there for everyone. Go check out Paranormal Intelligence Agency.
Yeah, it's paraintelagency.com.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My word.
Our new URL is paraintelagency.com. So I had to change the platform because the other one was so restrictive in what I could
got you.
with the website. So
okay, and I'll put a link into your book, Paranormal Planet, in the chat as well.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry, I've got like 200 windows still open, even though I shut them all before. So what's next then? What's next on your?
Getting this book out is next. There's some final stuff I got to get done there, but it will be out in the next. It'll be 2 weeks, and it'll be on Amazon with my other books. But next is every Thursday night I'm doing a live show. And that's on the Beyond Explanation channel. I do a show called Paranormal Planet. It's named after my book. And we cover a different paranormal topic each week and tons of crypto stuff. Like the last 5 episodes have all been cryptid animals. So on top of that, I've been in talks to be on a show with some producers who are claiming to have authentic footage of an alien creature. And can prove it. And this is a big production company. So I don't know what to make of it, but they want me to come and take a look at it. So that's next. And that might lead to something bigger and better. If what they say is true, then you can forget about the UFO films and all of that, because this will be a provable film of what's in the craft actually flying it. So, and there was so many interesting things that they told me about CIA micro expression analysis and all kinds of things like that. So,
I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? The proof seems to, seems to be the hardest thing. Even with proof, your proof is questioned so much.
Right.
Beyond, like, it feels like people will never be satisfied with whatever you come up with, unless they can physically see it for themselves. Or
until you force them into a situation where they can no longer deny the truth. And in this case, it's going to be a body. Because it is such an affliction upon existing belief systems. Any religion you can think of, this is an affront to it. Any kind of science you can think of, this is an affront to it. It will undermine people's belief that the authorities are actually and telling them the truth. And it'll be the first major domino, I think, that will fall, that will revolutionize science as a whole. So
here's the hoping. Yeah, that's outstanding.
A question here from Sasha Feline. What are Jack's thoughts on people that are habituating with them on their property? Bigfoot, I'm presuming.
I think it's a dangerous practice. In the end, no matter how much anthropomorphism that we use to humanize these animals, they are in fact not human. And we have to remember that this is a very strong, very fast apex predator who has been seen in the areas where there are missing people. So, they don't take that into account, or they think Harry and the Hendersons, I'm going to give him an apple. And so you have to at least consider those possibilities when you take on the risk of habituating one of these creatures. Can we learn a lot about them from that? That I don't know. Could it tell us more about species behavioral patterns? That would be great. We know that the DNA, if they leave any at one of these gifting sites, isn't going to work. And it's not likely that they're going to die at the gifting site. So I'm not real sure what the purpose would be at this stage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think everybody wants, well, not everybody, but there are those people that want them to be these gentle, guardians of the forest. And maybe there are, maybe there's a real biodiversity or a personality inventory, just like there are in people. Like there's wonderful people, and then there's real dicks, and
Right.
the whole spectrum between. So, but I think you're right. It's the one thing that you don't want to get wrong.
Yeah, exactly. JC, I showed this on my show the other day, and I think you'll laugh. So when we started working together, and after I saw my first Bigfoot, who peeked out from behind a tree and it had eyes that were as big as my fist. I swear to God, it was unbelievable. But and I was sitting there shaking in my boots. So on the next crypto trip that we had, JC Johnson threw this to me across the fire, and I'm like, "What's this?" And he goes, "It's a rape whistle." And I said, "Why do I need a rape whistle?" And he goes, "Jack, that's for when all else fails."
That's the last option.
Oh, that's right, because they keep running off with the mates.
At least we can hear where it's carrying you.
At least I attracted a female who took a shine to me.
Got another question here from Melinda. Jack, if Bigfoot plays a part in the missing, why do you think they are taking people?
Well, it could be as simple as an easy meal. It could be that they're simply trying to protect their territory. This non-stop encroachment on their environment could be seen as a threat that they're trying to fight. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. It could be that you just have a few that are just meaner than you can believe, which is something that JC and I thought. There were ones who were gentle, there were ones who were indifferent, and then there were ones who were straight killing machines. And you kind of have a wide array there. So,
do you think those would live in groups? Do you think those groups, if they're intelligent, would want to live in more harmony rather than under threat? Do you think there's rogue ones maybe that go around?
I do. We've had some evidence to suggest that when a male in one of these family groups gets to breeding age, he's typically driven out of that clan. And that's when you see these lone males, and that's when they're more dangerous than at other periods. The horrible smell that people sometimes smell, that's like a buck in rut. These creatures have glands all over their bodies, and when these males are in that breeding mode, they exhibit these secretions that are odorous that attract a female.
Mm.
So
you don't think that's a stress reaction, like getting too close, and it's the...
I don't. I think they're just happen to be around a guy that's looking for a date. And that's his cologne, you know.
He's a keeper. He's a keeper. Awesome.
We've got a question here from Strangeland. Jack, was there a second DNA testing done other than what Melba Ketchum did? Scott Cabot has said J.C. Johnson was part of it but couldn't talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know what Scott's talking about. I know Scott, but yes, and in my book I present 4 of those occasions, 2 of which were independently tested by producers at the History Channel. They were sent to world-class laboratories, so we know the results are those results. So, and those are compared with the Sasquatch Genome Project and a private genomic study that we kept some samples for ourselves and sent off as yet another corroboration of these other findings. So,
just to make it clear, Mr. Nice One, these are just opinions. None of us know really what's going on.
Now, there are no experts in the field of cryptozoology.
Yeah.
All theories are equal until one of them is proven true. So
exactly. If we couldn't talk about this and discuss ideas, we'd have nothing to talk about, would we?
Right.
But yeah, they are just opinions of what people think. We really don't know. So no, we're not saying anything like that. Should we do one more question? Because we're almost up on the hour. I guess this is a general one, but what do we feel? Do you think we'll be arrested for murder for killing one because they are so human? Would that not be in the circumstances as well?
It's more possible, I think, these days with the jury, but you're very, very hard pressed to get any jury to convict you of murder of an animal our scientists say shouldn't even exist, and which could easily present itself as a mortal danger. And you're out in the woods with a gun and you're going to say, well, this thing charged me and I killed it. You think a jury's going to convict you of murder? They're not.
It's a good point, isn't it? It's definitely a good point. Vincent mentions you found a ton of Bigfoot poo.
That's true. That's true. And some of it had black bear fur in it. This thing had killed and eaten a black bear.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's interesting to know what's in, the poo. I'm going to put the link again to your channel in the live chat there. It's already in the description. If anyone wants to go and check out Jack over there, go and hit that link after the show, obviously, just as the show finishes, not before. We are winding down now. It's been great talking to you, Jack. It'd be great to get you back on again sometime, because I think we've kind of only just scratched the surface. You've obviously but done lots and lots of things over the years that you've been into this. Brent, want to thank you for coming on and making it all look pretty up there.
Oh, it's great. And Jack, it's been great meeting you as well. I really enjoyed
you too, Brent.
And I'm gonna look further into your work as a result of this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for being in the chat. Thanks to the mods. Sorry if I've missed any questions. We'll be back here on Sunday night for Sunday Encounters. But until then, everyone, bye-bye.
Good night.